Hello and welcome. I'm Paweł Trzaskowski and you're watching World News. Ilie Bolojan has been appointed as the new Prime Minister of Romania. The leader of the centre-right National Liberal Party will now have to convince other pro-European MPs to join his coalition and face a vote of confidence next week.
Romania's recently elected President Nicu Șordan finally announced his nomination for the country's new Prime Minister. It's Ilie Bolojan, the leader of the centre-right National Liberal Party and a man who served as Romania's interim president earlier this year.
I will pursue three directions: to put the country's finances in order, to work for good governance that creates conditions for development in Romania, and, through everything we do, not least, to show due respect to Romanians.
The country's fiscal deficit from last year, equal to 9.3% of GDP, has to be lowered within the next government's tenure to avoid a ratings downgrade and to unblock billions of euros worth of EU funds. The EU has proposed fighting the deficit by increasing VAT, and the freshly appointed Prime Minister agrees with this approach. However, Romanian President Nicu Șordan really wants to avoid raising taxes to keep in line with his election promises.
Basically, it'll be a government that will have a very tough job ahead of us. We have quite an amount of budgetary deficit and commercial deficit, and we need to fix that. And for that, you need a broad coalition.
Now, Bolojan is set to continue coalition talks with other pro-European parties in the Romanian parliament: the Social Democrats, the centre-right Save Romania Union and the Hungarian Minority Party. The vote of confidence for the new cabinet is scheduled for next week. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
Ukrainians and Russians are one people, and thus the whole of Ukraine belongs to Russia in that sense, says Vladimir Putin. The Russian president made these divisive remarks when asked about the Russian army advances during his appearance at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Putin's remarks met with fierce international criticism, with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha calling them a display of disdain for the peace process. The Russian president also warned that Moscow's forces might take the town of Sumy in an effort to create a buffer zone around the Russia-Ukraine border. Russia currently controls a fifth of Ukraine's territory, including Crimea, nearly all of the Luhansk region, over 70% of the Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson regions, and fragments of the Kharkiv, Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Is Russia slipping into a recession? Russian President Vladimir Putin says he cannot let that happen after his economy minister admitted the country is already on the verge of one. This year's economic growth has dried up, with the trend pointing further downwards.
Russia's flagship economic forum in St. Petersburg is widely viewed as a platform for the Kremlin to show off its investment potential and boost confidence in the country's economy. But this year, Russia's economy minister made an unexpectedly blunt comment.
According to the current business environment and indicators, I think we are already on the verge of sliding into recession.
As economy minister, you should say something optimistic. Otherwise, it will appear on the internet immediately that Reshetnikov predicted that we would fall into recession.
I didn't predict it, I said that we are on the verge. Then everything depends on our decisions.
Earlier this month, the central bank cut interest rates by 1 percentage point, though they remain at an eye-watering 20%.
If inflation stops decreasing sustainably or even starts accelerating, the key rate may be raised.
While Russian inflation has eased slightly, as shown in official reports, which, according to many, should be taken with a pinch of salt, it stubbornly remains at more than double the central bank's target.
In Russia, it's still around 10%. So living standards in Russia have been declining because of high inflation.
But this caution has resulted in Russia's economy growing by a mere 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025, 3 times lower than last year. And the IMF expects the Russian economy to grow by 1.4% this year. Next year, it is forecast to slow even further. And experts believe Russia has reached the limit of its growth potential.
The only reason Russia was able to grow is because of this massive Keynesian explosion of capital into the defense sector, which then drove the economy for the last 2 years. Now that has expired itself, and now we're seeing the limits of the Russian economy and financial system to drive growth.
Meanwhile, revenues from energy exports, accounting for a third of the Kremlin's budget, dropped by more than a third year-on-year in May, due to lower oil prices and energy sanctions. And tougher times are on the horizon, with the European Union moving to cut Russian gas out of its energy supply completely, even if peace can be achieved. Jan Kennedy for TVP World.
Nearly 50% more civilians have been killed and injured in Ukraine in the first 5 months of 2025 than during the same period in 2024. The United Nations Assistant Secretary General Mirosław Jeńca briefed the UN Security Council on the situation in Ukraine, describing the rise in Russian strikes as alarming and condemned all attacks at civilian infrastructure.
According to Ukrainian authorities, between 1 and 17 June 2025, Russian armed forces launched at least 3,340 long-range drones, including loitering munitions and decoy drones, and 135 missiles into Ukraine. By comparison, 544 long-range munitions were launched during the entire month of June 2024. Let me once again unequivocally state, attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are strictly prohibited under international humanitarian law wherever they occur. We condemn all such attacks. They must cease immediately.
Nearly 50% more civilians have been killed and injured in Ukraine in the first 5 months of 2025 than during the same period in 2024. The UN Mine Action Service estimates that over 20% of Ukraine's land is contaminated by mines or unexploded ordnance, making it the most heavily contaminated country since World War II.
This is not a war fought in trenches. This Russian war is waged in bedrooms. This Russian war is a war in kitchens, war in playgrounds, war in hospitals, in schools. This is pure terror that never sleeps, terror that steals tomorrow before the dawn can break. This madness has to stop.
There are around 1 million Ukrainian war refugees in Poland. Those professionally active are responsible for nearly 3% of Polish GDP. Anastasia Janchenko and Sonia Agata-Biszczan took a closer look at the current situation on World Refugee Day 2025.
We realize that we have to continue our work to develop Ukrainian children, to develop Ukrainian culture in our children, in our future.
This is Daria. She is the founder of a talent studio for Ukrainian children in Poland. She is also one of the nearly 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland, most of whom came after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
It's been 3 years, so it feels a bit like a second home now. But I can't say that it was in the beginning, and I personally dream of returning home as soon as the war is over.
June 20th marks World Refugee Day. This day was first observed in 2001 and was intended to commemorate the signing of the 1951 Refugee Convention.
Since then, it's marked every year, and it's just become a moment to pause and reflect and think about refugees. First of all, to think about the plight and what they've been through and how the international community can support them, but also to look more positively and to say they can bring a lot to the countries that host them. They can bring a lot economically, but they can also bring a lot culturally.
Poland has stepped up on the world stage and done an exemplary job. By allowing refugees to work, to start businesses, they generated 2.7% of the GDP of Poland last year. At the same time, they generated productivity in the economy that led to higher wages for Poles.
A June report by the UNHCR and Deloitte suggests that this recent wave of immigration even had a positive impact on the employment of Polish citizens.
So ultimately, it was a win-win for both Poland and for Ukrainian refugees. So I think Poland has shown itself to be a country that has demonstrated that smart policy choices can help refugees and at the same time help Poles.
According to the UNHCR, by May 2024, over 120 million people worldwide were forcibly displaced as a consequence of persecution, conflict, violence, or human rights violations. For TVP World, Sonia Gatabishchan and Anastasia Yanchenko.
And this concludes our news bulletin. See you again on the hour.